Hi again, everyone. We're going to do a little bit of review on clearing fractions and decimals. So you should have done this before in the past. I'm just going to do a few to remind you how to do it. We're going to look at clearing fractions first. So remember, when you clear fractions, you have to find a common denominator in order to get the problem without fractions. And we want to multiply by that number. So in this case, the common denominator would be 16. So I'm going to multiply everything by 16. Okay, when I do this, I can go ahead and cancel with any of the denominators. So the 2 and the 16 can both be reduced by 2. The 2 becomes a 1, the 16 becomes an 8, and 8 times 1, which is the number that's left over, is 8x. Now I go ahead and do it with the next one. The 4 and the 16 can both be divided by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 16 divided by 4 is 4. And 4 times the 1 that's already there is 4. Put my equal sign. And in this one, the 16 and the 16 will both cancel, because if you divide 16 by 16, they both become 1s. And 5 times 1 is just 5. So now I have a problem where I have no more fractions, and I can go ahead and solve this problem the way I would solve any two-step equation. So in this case, I'm going to end up with a fraction, which is very likely. A lot of times when you start with a fraction, you're going to end with a fraction. You start with a decimal, you're going to end with a decimal. But that's okay. At least my problem was easier to work out, and I didn't have to find common denominators when I moved it around the equation. Okay, so go ahead and try to do this one on your own, the first one. Make sure you pause, because the answer is going to be put up in a second. Okay, so on this one, our common denominator was 35. So I multiplied everything by 35. The first thing I want to do is put that 4x, because it's not a fraction. I want to make it into a fraction, put it over 1. So I put it over 1, multiplied everything by 35, reduced. With the 4x, there's nothing to reduce, so it's just 35 times 4. And then I end up with my equation, 140x plus 10 equals negative 28. Again, we solve like a regular two-step problem, but I get to a point where I'm going to have negative 38 over 40, which is over here, right? Once I divide by 140. I still have to reduce that, so make sure all your answers are fully reduced. If you need more practice, you can go ahead and do the next one. Okay, so one thing I do want you to remember is if there is a parentheses, so if there's a number being distributed, you can still clear fractions, but you cannot multiply with the numbers inside the parentheses. So if I clear here, I can either distribute first and then clear, if this confuses me, or I can find my common denominator but only multiply the numbers that are not part of the parentheses. So if you notice in this one, I'm multiplying the 1/2, and I'm multiplying the 4/5, but I am not multiplying the x minus 6. And the reason is because I'm going to distribute that 5 over anyway. So if I multiply the 1/2 and I multiply the x minus 6, I'm double multiplying, because then I'm going to multiply again by that 1/2, or now a 5. So we don't want to multiply what's inside of the parentheses. So be very careful with that. And then we just solve the problem again like a regular problem. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is again going to give me a fraction, which is totally fine. If you can reduce, reduce, and if you can't, then you leave it as an improper fraction. Do not change into mixed numbers. Okay, so let's look at clearing decimals. Clearing decimals is a little bit different because now we don't have a fraction, but we work the same way. You want to get rid of the decimal. So in order to get rid of the decimal, you move it over the amount of times that it would take to get rid of all the decimals. So in this problem, 2.35 and 0.21 are the ones with the most numbers after the decimals. They have 2 numbers. So I want to multiply everything by 100, or move the decimal over twice to be able to get rid of those decimals. But I have to do it on every single number. And again, just like the one that we just did, if there's a parentheses, you don't do it on the numbers inside the parentheses. So I end up with 140x minus 180 plus 235x equals 21. Sometimes it's beneficial to clear decimals, sometimes it's not. You might feel like you think it's easier to just work it out with the decimals in there. It doesn't really matter. It's totally up to you. So if I combine my like terms, I get 375x minus 180 equals 21. Add the 180. Now, the only thing you have to remember is with a decimal, you want to end up with a decimal. So even though in this case, I would end up with a fraction, I need to actually do the division because I need to end up with a decimal since I started with a decimal. So when you do the division here, we're not going to have calculators, but it is 0.536. You would do it by hand. Obviously, I'm not going to give you the numbers this big. You'll usually be able to do them in your head. So if you want an example, here are two examples that you can look at. You can go ahead and try the first one. Here's the answer to that problem. We only had to multiply it by 10. We only had to move the decimal over once on this one, because the most numbers after the decimal is 1. And this one ended up dividing nicely. Usually you'll have problems that divide nicely or have one number after the decimal.